Episode 6, Brainwashing 101. I had briefly met Randy, Candy's sister, a couple times, but I really didn't know her. Candy told me she wanted to talk to me, so we went to her house for dinner. Through Candy, I had heard about the family's trials and tribulations over her sister's involvement in the Moonies. She had met the group and after a weekend had come home, sold her possessions, emptied her bank account, quit her job, and was gone. Over the next few years, the family had very little contact with her. At some point, they must have located her because they were able to kidnap and deprogram her. Over dinner, I was to find out that Randy was now actively getting other people out of these pseudo-religious groups. That evening, she told me about the daughter of one of her mother's co-workers who was involved in a cult in the desert. The mother's name was Rose, and her daughter was Susan. She asked me if I would help rescue Susan. She was asking me because she knew I had studied martial arts, and her sister had told her that I was trustworthy. Earlier that year, 918 people had died in the jungle of Guyana in a utopia known as Jonestown. They were the original Kool-Aid drinkers. I never been a fan of mental enslavement, so I told her, sure, let's go get her. This would be the first of 60 rescues that I would be involved in over the next 13 years. We did, in fact, rescue people. Nobody ever went back in. They were ecstatic to have their lives back. The law, on the other hand, looked at it as kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment, so we had to be extremely careful not to get caught. At the time, the cults were in their heyday. You could hardly go to a grocery store parking lot, and certainly not an airport, without being approached several times by cult members. The Moonies and the Krishnas were the most publicly known, but there were hundreds of different groups. The common theme between them was they practiced brainwashing in the clinical sense. By that I mean their leaders could direct them to their deaths, and they would follow these orders without question. In a cult, doubt is sin. Think about that. It's the reason why Jonestown mothers fed their babes in arms poisoned Kool-Aid without hesitation. When the leader is in direct contact with God and your ability to critically think has been annihilated, what choice do you have? In 1957, psychologist Robert J. Lifton went to Hong Kong and interviewed 50 people. Half were Westerners, in the main missionaries, and the other half were Chinese nationals. Their commonality was that they had all been to re-education camps. As a result of these interviews, Lifton ascertained that there were 8 psychological themes employed on these individuals to achieve mind control / thought reform / brainwashing. We've all been exposed to some of these themes through advertising. Certainly the Army uses a handful, but to create mind control that cult members are under, all 8 themes must be used in concert. It's like making a chocolate cake. If you use the right ingredients in the right proportions, you only get one outcome. A chocolate cake. You'll never get an apple pie. So if all 8 of these psychological themes are used, the outcome is mind control. And if all 8 aren't in evidence, then it's not a cult. And that's what I mean when I use the word cult. The movie Rocky Horror Show certainly had a cult following, but these people weren't castrating themselves before committing suicide like the Hale Bopp Comet folks. You can't brainwash idiots and babies. The smarter a person is, the easier it is to brainwash them. It takes between 3 and 72 hours to get someone to a state where they will leave everything from their previous life and, in air quotes, join a cult. In fact, no one ever willingly joined a group. They were coerced into it. People have the opinion that those that joined these groups were lacking somehow, They were weak-minded, naive. There must be some sort of flaw. They were searching for something. In fact, the common thread between all the people that were in these groups was that they were approached by the group at a low point or a big transition in their lives. The first or last year of college, losing a job, breaking up with a significant other. When people were doing well in life, they had no desire to go away for the weekend to listen to a speaker or to the Krishna ashram. The pitch of a lot of the groups was like this: "What are you doing this weekend? A world famous speaker is coming and he changed my life. Why don't you do something that'll make a difference in your life?" That offer is a lot more attractive to someone who's at some sort of crossroads. It has nothing to do with a person per se. It has to do with where they are at that particular moment in their lives. There's two types of people. One is the kind that wants to help the world. The other is the kind of person that wants to be the best person they can be. For them, it's all about self-improvement and enlightenment. There were cults aplenty for both types. The recipe for mind control was in the open. If you had no scruples, you could start a cult without a cent. If the leader had enough recruits under his control, it's just like printing money. These groups got fantastically wealthy. They did this in basically two ways. The most common was to have the membership hold down regular jobs and then give all their money to the group, i.e., the leader. The second was to beg money from people on the streets under false pretenses, or serve as slave labor in the cult's businesses. The Moonies had mobile fundraising teams, MFTs. I believe there were about 3,000 members that crisscrossed the country. Members would get in a van in the morning and be dropped off by their captain, who was the driver. He'd drop them off at various locations around the city, wherever they were working, and they'd lie for money. A favorite daytime location might be a grocery store or a mall parking lot. The member would go into the grocery store and buy a bag of little wrapped candies, like little Snickers or even peppermints, as long as they were individually wrapped, then approach people in the parking lot. They would tell strangers that they were from the church, right around the corner, and they were raising money for unwed mothers. Since most locales have ordinances against begging, they would give them something, the candy, for their donation. As it got later in the evening, they would be picked up from the parking lots and brought to an area that had a lot of nightlife. They would then, as they expressed it, blitz bars. This was particularly productive for the girls, but also dangerous. Girls were raped, and some were so exhausted they were hit by cars. The work was unrelenting. At the end of the night, the captain would pick them up. They'd be in the van and perform the ritual of pray and count up, pray and count up, pray and count up. And they'd count up to see what the day's take was. Then at 2 or 3 in the morning, they would go to a house and crash for a couple hours, get up and do it again. The Moonies had houses all over the country just for this purpose. Moon had stock in McDonald's. Consequently, that's where they ate 3 meals a day after day, month after month, year after year. Moon made $1 million every 3 days on the back of his mobile fundraising teams. To motivate his members, Moon had a doctrine called economic restoration. Most of the cults did have the same thing, they just called it a different name. The basis of economic restoration was, who has the world's money now? All you have to do is look around. It's easy to realize the devil controls the world. Thus, the devil controls the world's money. So it's our duty to get the money back to God's side. During the programming, we would ask Moonies, what does God need with money? The question apparently never came up in the group. Another doctrine that was essential for this effort was something called heavenly deception. And once again, all the cults practiced the same sort of thing. Heavenly deception was the doctrine that it was fine to lie about where the money was being used or anything else regarding the cult. Just like the Muslim faith, you don't have to tell an unbeliever the truth about anything. The other thing that was instilled into the fundraisers was that if you could get someone to give you even the smallest amount of money, you would actually save their soul. That's motivation. One fundraiser was on the street and a car accident occurred right in front of her. Of course, this is before cell phones. A passerby pressed a dime into her hand and told her to call an ambulance. She thought it was more important to keep the dime than to make the phone call. After all, God would save the injured guy. At that time, the Moonies had a number of businesses. At one point, they had the shrimp business in Gloucester, Massachusetts under their control. The cult would buy lobster boats and crew them with cult members, no labor costs. They did the same thing with shrimp in the Gulf and with crab in Alaska. They had a lot of stores and businesses that they would profit from. They broke the law doing this all the time. You can't take money that was collected for charity and then turn it into a money-making business. It's supposed to be used for the charity that it was solicited for. Because of the mass amount of money that these groups made, they had a good deal of political power. Moon had a goal of having one of his members on the staff of every congressman and senator in Washington. He wasn't 100% successful, but he certainly had many of his members on the staffs of various politicians. At this point, you may ask, how on earth could anybody be talked into something like this? Well, let me tell you the story of Sammy Blackman. Sammy left his home in Australia to come and see America. He landed in San Francisco and made his way from the airport to the bus station to get a bus to see some Yanks he'd met down under. He was a stranger in a strange land. He carried a backpack with an Australian flag on it and his guitar. As he entered the bus station, two cute, well-dressed girls approached him. They told Sammy that they were waiting for a friend to come in from Fresno. They said they'd spotted his flag and had never met an Australian. These girls were Moonie recruiters. Their holy mission was to get more people into the Moonies. They used a technique they called love bombing. Everything that came out of Sammy's mouth was the most wonderful thing they'd ever heard. Sammy himself was their kind of man, so big and so strong. And he had such a sexy accent, don't you know? After a sufficient amount of flirting and casual touching, just a hand on the arm or the shoulder, they asked Sammy if he would come to dinner with them that evening. Sammy has been ensnared by these sirens' songs. What else would a young, red-blooded fella do? Well, Sammy did what most fellas would do. He blew off his Yank friends and made plans for dinner while thinking to himself, America's a great place. I've been here for 3 hours and I've already got prospects with two young ladies. They gave him the address of a house on Sutter Street, and Sammy walked around San Francisco for a couple hours and then made his way to the address. I know the house on Sutter Street quite well. I surveilled it many times looking for particular people. Whenever I was there, I kept lookout for foreigners with backpacks walking toward the address. I would stop them and ask if that was the house they were going to. When they said yes, I would tell them, well, it's a Moonie house. Every time they looked so surprised, thanked me, and walked away. The Moonies didn't have a good reputation, and of course, whoever invited them for dinner hadn't mentioned a word about Moonies, the Unification Church, or any kind of religion. The interaction was all couched in a social context. Sammy shows up at the house and is welcomed in by someone other than the girls he met. He's told to drop his gear in the hall, and he comes in. He finds a whole bunch of people in the house, most of them travelers like him. He knew the girls' names and asked about them. He's told, well, they'll be here shortly. Over the course of the evening, more and more people flow in. Sammy asks, "Whose house is this?" He is told, "Well, it's ours." Sammy asks, "Who are you?" They say, "We're just a group of young people that want to help the world improve." The oldest person in sight's mid-30s. Before dinner, a movie's shown. The movie was shot in Central Park, New York City, and shows young people, just like these in the house, feeding the homeless and destitute. Sammy even recognizes one of the guys in the house in the film. After the movie, dinner is served. Since Sammy has arrived at the house, a number of people have asked him, "Are you going up to the ranch?" Sammy said no, he was supposed to see some friends. During dinner, he's repeatedly asked, "You going up to the ranch?" Sammy once again talks about his friends, and they say, "Well, how are you going to get there? Do you have a car? Because there's no bus headed that way now." The two girls he met at the bus station finally show up, and they say, "Oh, come on, baby. Please, come on up to the ranch." So now it's 11 o'clock at night. He's exhausted from a flight from Australia. Here he lands and says, "Okay, but I got to leave tomorrow, okay?" "Sure, no problem. You can leave any time you want." I think that's what they said in the Hotel California, too. Now there's a movement to get all the gear out of the hallway and into a van that's parked outside. So that happens. They're still waiting for people, and it's getting late, and they'll take off as soon as everybody arrives. By 12:30, everyone that's going to the ranch shows up. They go outside to find more vans waiting to take them up to the ranch. But lo and behold, the van that had all their stuff in has been broken into, and all their stuff's been ransacked. Sammy's traveler's checks, his passport, his return ticket to Australia, they're all gone. And he's not the only one. It's Friday night. What's he going to be able to do until Monday when government offices or banks reopen? There's a lot of moaning and whining and gnashing of teeth from his hosts. They talk about how the neighborhood's gone downhill and that they've never had any troubles like this before. Oh, they can't believe someone would actually break into their van. Of course, they didn't tell Sammy and the rest of the travelers that the van gets broken into every Friday night. Now, Sammy had a couple of bucks in his pocket, and now he's dependent on these people for the next couple of days until he get in touch with his family back home and sort this out. Off they go to the ranch in Boonville, California, a 2-hour drive north. They get to the ranch about 3 in the morning. They're assigned bunks and cabins, some for men, some for women. He gets a quick nap and is awoken at 5:30, ostensibly to see the sun come up. Behavior modification starts immediately. Every aspect of Sammy's environment is completely controlled. They're told to participate in a team building and cooperation exercise. It's called choo-choo pows. A large circle is formed. Everyone holds hands with their neighbors left and right. The group starts moving forward toward the center, saying choo-choo, choo-choo with every step, moving faster and faster until they all meet in the middle where they raise their hands and shout, "Pow!" Hence, choo-choo pows. So what the group has accomplished right now is to take adults and make them exhibit childish behavior. So after this and other childlike games, they go in for a low-calorie breakfast of cold cereal and Kool-Aid. By this time, Sammy, of course, is exhausted. He had a 24-hour flight from Australia, a couple hours sleep, and now he's semi-comatose in the chilly California morning. His sleep deprivation would be very helpful for what comes next. Time for lecture. Let the programming begin. Everyone is ushered into a large room with seats for all. After the chilly air outside, the room is quite warm. Anyone can pay attention for a certain amount of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, but at some point, we all drift off. The speaker up front is well lit. The cadence of his voice and his hand movement are metronome-like. He may as well be swinging a watch and saying, "Watch the watch." He talks about the state of the world. Look around. You see evil everywhere. Just look on the nightly news. Look at man's inhumanity to man. Who do you think has control of this world? It's evident. It's the prince of liars, the devil himself. Well, what are you going to do about it? What power do you have? What power do any of us have? But, my friend, there's hope. By this time, people are struggling to stay awake. Shills in the audience have been planted to give you a little shove if you start to nod off. Right now, you're in an ideal suggestive state, and that's when the little lies start to come in. If anyone has a question, they're told to hold it till later. All questions will be addressed. Of course, the questions are never addressed. Subtle clues have been sown in your unconscious mind. You really weren't even paying attention, but your ears still heard every word. After the lecture, a buddy is assigned to you. From that moment on, you won't be left alone. There'll be no time for reflection, to think about what you've been told. There'll be no one outside the group you can ask. No reality testing is allowed. You can't ask your folks or your priest. Any question you might have will be deflected, and it will soon become apparent that going along with the program will earn you warmth and praise. Any negative comment will be met with criticism and scorn for your inability to open your mind. Over the next 2 days, Sammy sat through 24 hours of lecture. The lectures were strewn with clues that Sammy would later assemble. For example, a Bible verse says that Christ comes again. It'll be like lightning from east to west, and every eye will see and every knee will bend. The lecturer asked the question, in view of the verse, will the Messiah come from the east? He states, many people think so. He goes on to say, what Christian countries lie in the east? The biggest one, with the most devout Christians, is Korea. Could the Lord, the second advent, come from Korea? We don't know, but it's certainly possible. And the most exciting news is that all biblical prophecy points to the fact that the Messiah is probably right here now. Lots of puzzle pieces for Sammy to use. Everything that's happened to Sammy in the last 2 days has been orchestrated. Every word he's heard, every action anyone besides the recruits has been planned and rehearsed. The joke the cook told that appeared to be so spontaneous had been practiced again and again. After the last lecture on Sunday night, Sammy was asked by his shadow to go to one of the other houses on the property and help clean out a closet. As he works in the closet, Sammy moves a book which happens to have a picture of the Moonies leader, Sun Myung Moon, on the cover. All the pieces fall into place. Sammy looks at the picture and has an epiphany. He looks at his shadow and says, is this guy, Moon, the Messiah? The shadow says, well, I certainly believe so, but you're going to have to make up your own mind. Well, Sammy must be an idiot. You know, I never met anyone that thought that they could be brainwashed. Not a single person. And yet millions of people are. I have no doubt that a large part of this is a form of self-hypnosis. Cult members are required to spend 6 to 8 hours a day in thought-stopping rituals, praying, chanting, exercises that occupy the mind from critical thought and toward thought-terminating cliches. Hypnotists claim that they can't make a subject do anything that they wouldn't ordinarily do. An honest hypnotist knows that's not so. All you have to do is change the person's reality. Because of my interest in this subject, I have a number of colleagues that are hypnotists. One of these friends from Seattle invited me to a show he was performing. He had half a dozen people under hypnosis on the stage. From his subjects, he picked one young lady and asked her if she had come alone. She said no, she'd come with her boyfriend. He said, find your boyfriend in the audience and sit on his lap and give him a big kiss. She went to him, straddled his lap, wrapped her arms around him, and gave him a big kiss. The hypnotist then said, for some strange and unexplainable reason, that's not your boyfriend. That's some pervert. Her eyes flew open in surprise, and she hauled off and slapped her boyfriend across the face. The hypnotist called her back to the stage, and you could see she was visually shaken and confused. He told her that, for some strange and unexplainable reason, her boyfriend was back and all was well. He may not have been able to have her go up and slap him, but once he changed her reality, he could. The hypnotist told me he could make a person walk off a balcony by telling them that for some strange and unexplainable reason, they were not on the 14th floor, but actually on the ground floor, so it was perfectly safe to step over the rail onto the ground. Sammy told me that he was nearly convinced that Moon was in fact the Messiah. Up to that point, no one had said anything about the Moonies, the Unification Church, or the group being any sort of religion. The next morning, there was a commotion at the gate. People often came to the gate looking for their family members. Sammy had been brought up a Catholic and was a fairly staunch believer. Outside the gate, that morning, there was a Catholic nun looking for her sister. She told Sammy that the group he was in was a cult called the Moonies. He told me that it was like a miracle because if she hadn't come, he wouldn't have left. He left with her and was very happy to have escaped. If Sammy had stayed much longer, it would have been doubtful whether he could have extricated himself from this group. Members are held in groups like this by guilt and fear. They live in an environment of secret police. Everybody watches everybody closely for any infraction of the doctrine. The programming ensures that members are self-policing as far as their inner conversation. We all talk to ourselves. How would it be if your inner conversation was tampered with and you shut out thoughts you had out of fear? All the groups have a particular method of doing this, but it all boils down to the same thing. The Moonies explain it thusly. Think of an orange. Can you see it? Can you see the texture on the peel? Can you smell it? Where's that orange? It's in spirit world. Every thought you've ever had, every thought you will have, is transmitted into spirit world. There are a lot of evil spirits there, and they'll use your thoughts against you. They will go out of their way to do as much damage to you as possible because you, being a true believer of the Lord, the second advent, you're very dangerous to them. Unfortunately, only the Moonies are following the true Christ. So you must be extremely careful about what you think and bring to life in the spirit world. The psychological pressure on cult members is so great that women, just like in Nazi concentration camps, stop menstruating. They change in other physiological ways as well. There's something about their look and manner that is different. You can line up 10 people, one of them being a cult member, and I can tell you which one it is just by looking at them. All the cult members I've ever met were really good people. They had their good intentions and ideals twisted and manipulated for the benefit of some real evil men and women. To most rational people, the whole idea of being brainwashed seems unbelievable. I can't tell you firsthand what the experience is like, having never been in a cult. If you'd like to know more about it, there's lots of books out there written by ex-cult members, which can give you a lot more insight into the day-to-day existence of someone under mind control. I can recommend Article 1 of the International Cultic Studies Association. In this article, the ICSA gives a great wealth of information about cults and deprogramming. They even present a first-hand account of a Krishna deprogramming. I found it very similar to the deprogrammings I was involved in. All I can do is tell you about my experience working to get these people out of these horrible groups. Meanwhile, back to Rose and Susan. The mother, Rose, had been quite canny in that she kept good relations with the cults. It was all facade. If she had not have played nice, she would not have any access to her daughter. So although she loathed the group and its leader, she never let on. The cults loved these kinds of parents. Don't forget, we're talking about adult children. If a person was a minor, parents could call up the sheriff and get them out of the group. But most of the cult members were adults, and the parents had no power at all. The cult used supportive parents for their benefit. The cults would use these parents as sources to tell the media what a fine organization they were and how the children were really benefiting from their involvement in the group. Supportive parents were often given benefits that other parents who were against the group, who knew what they were doing, how damaging they were to their kids, they'd never be allowed. Rose had been very clever in pretending not to mind the cult had her daughter. Because of the support, she was allowed to see her daughter on a semi-monthly basis. She was allowed to take Susan for a meal or go shopping. We were told that she was going to take Susan shopping this upcoming Friday. We made a plan. One of the most important things you need in a deprogramming is a secure location. You can't go to the family's summer camp because the cult member may well have told the cult about it. You have to have a house that the cult has no idea about. Rose was able to get us a cabin from a coworker of hers in Lake Arrowhead. The cabin was a 6-bedroom, 5-bathroom, lakefront McLodge. The houses we used for deprogramming always had to have a bedroom with adjacent bathroom. Both were swept for any kind of weapon. Oftentimes, we just cleaned them right out, and the only thing we left was toilet paper, soap, and a hand towel. Keep in mind, cult members were told by their leaders that if they were captured by deprogrammers, they first had to try to convert the deprogrammer. Secondly, try to escape. If that wasn't possible, kill the deprogrammers. If they couldn't, they were to kill themselves. In deprogramming, you need, first and foremost, at least one deprogrammer. In my experience, these have always been ex-cult members. Randy had been a Moonie. Susan was in a Christian group, so she enlisted the aid of Charlie, an ex-Christian cult member. You need security. Security not only arranges and executes the kidnapping, but they watch the cult member around the clock. Randy asked if I knew anyone that would help us on security, so I got a hold of Frank Donahue's nephew, Ricky. Deprogrammings lasted between 3 and 5 days. If you're not successful in 5 days, you're not going to be. We were the most successful team in the country, and we only failed once. Hold your horses, Hearts Precious. I'll get to that nightmare shortly. The ruse we used to gain custody in Susan's case was something that we would do any time the parent still had contact with the child. This, however, was quite infrequent. Out of the 60 I did, this technique was only applicable maybe 3 or 4 times. So here's how it went down. Rose and Susan were going shopping. Rose told us where they'd be. When they came out of the store, Randy and I walked down the sidewalk. Rose spots us and says, "Hey, look, it's Carolyn from work." They approach Randy, a.k.a. Carolyn, and me. And Rose says, "Hey, good to see you. What's up?" Carolyn says, "This is my friend Jesse, and our car broke down. Unfortunately, it's not going to be ready until tomorrow, so we're kind of stranded." Susan says, "You guys need a ride?" And we say, "That'd be great." We go to Rose's car, get in, and off we go to the safe house. Randy sits in front with Rose, and I sit in the back with Susan. We arrive at the Lake Arrowhead cabin about an hour later. We go to the door, and Ricky opens it, and we go in. It quickly becomes clear to Susan that things are not as they appeared. At that point, we had what was come to be known as the family meeting. Don't forget, this was all new. We were pioneers, so to speak. We definitely had a learning curve. At the time, there was no deprogrammer's handbook. It's funny I say that because Scientology actually printed a deprogrammer's handbook. It was written purportedly by Ted Patrick, the so called father of deprogramming. Of course, this was a lie. On the cover, it showed a Christ like figure tied to a chair surrounded by thugs. The picture was reminiscent of a Gestapo interrogation. After Scientology produced it, they made sure that every member of Congress had a copy of it. It was also disseminated to the cults. As time went on, this actually benefited us because we didn't do anything that there wasn't a handbook. It was quite a frightening pamphlet. According to the handbook, cult members would be stripped naked and any flaw in their body would be ridiculed. They were to be sexually assaulted, kept awake for days, and drugged. It was certainly good for us when none of this happened. Just another lie that they'd been told. On one job, the mother of a cult member came to me and said her daughter was afraid that we were going to use drugs on her. I told the mother that if the daughter was very good, we might let her smoke a joint. Other than that, no drugs. After she was out, another girl told me that if there was going to be any rape involved, she was hoping it would be me. After every deprogramming, we learned more and more and improved our techniques. During the family meeting, they found out that they were not allowed to leave the house. The cult member would inevitably say, "You can't kidnap me." We informed them that, yes, we can kidnap you, and you're not going to leave until we've had our say. It would explain why the parents had taken such a drastic action. The cults quantify love. You only have so much. So the love that you give to your father and mother and brothers and sisters and friends, well, that love is not going to the leader. And if you don't give the leader all your love, certainly you're not worthy of his love. The hatreds the children exhibited toward their parents during these meetings was breathtaking. We told them that after we had our say, if they still wanted to go back to the group, we would drive them. Until that time, they would be restricted to a particular bedroom and bathroom. They were told that their parents were there to make sure that no harm would come to them and any creature comfort that they desired would be provided for them. Mom was there to cook their favorite dishes. If they were tired, they would be allowed to sleep because we couldn't work with a tired mind. We wanted them rested and alert. We were going to tell them things about their group they didn't know. We were going to tell them about other cults that did the same deceptive things their group did. We would answer any questions that they had, questions that they never have answered in the group. Susan's deprogramming turned out to be fairly typical. It lasted 3 days. She told us about a family that was in her group, a father, a mother, and a diabetic 8-year-old boy. The leader told the parents and the child that if they really had faith in God, they would trust him and forego the insulin their son was taking. The parents acquiesced. The boy lingered for days. The parents begged the cult leader to relent and let them give their son the insulin. He didn't, and the boy died a terrible death. The leader told the parents that the boy's death was their fault because they didn't have enough faith in the Lord. It just wasn't strong enough. Susan said they took the body, put it in a wooden box, took the box to the train station, and shipped it to Texas. Of course, this was before tracking numbers, computers, surveillance cameras. In those days, it was a clever way to get rid of a body. It wouldn't be difficult to get rid of. All the cults we worked with used the Bible as their authority. The deprogrammers I worked with were really experts in the cults. They knew a lot more than the members we were working with. There was no point of doctrine that they couldn't refute or explain. The deprogrammer would tell the cult member, we need a common language we can communicate it in. He would ask, do you believe in the Bible? They would say yes. He would ask every word. They would say yes. Now we had a starting point. Deprogramming was not a matter of converting them to our point of view. It's getting a person to analyze information like they would have before they got in the group. We also pointed out the inconsistency of what the group preached and what it practiced. If the group is nothing but holiness and righteousness, why is it necessary to deceive people, to lie to them, to get them to join a group or cheat them out of their money? A good tree can't bear bad fruit. It was necessary to create paradoxes between what the cult told them and what the Bible says. They had been programmed in large part on twisting the scripture. For example, there's a verse, like lightning flashes from east to west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Every eye shall see, and every knee will bend. The Moonies used this to lend credence to the fact that Moon, coming from the east, was the Messiah. So we would ask the Moonie if they believe this verse. Of course, they'd say yes. Then we would ask, well, if this is so, how come only the Moonies recognize Moon as Christ? The Bible says every eye will see, every knee will bend. We'd ask them about the verse, many will come on the strength of my name, saying they are the Lord. They will perform great signs and wonders, but they are false. Do not believe them. They will deceive even God's people. So when the Bible warns you, do not believe anyone that tells you they're Christ. Why do you believe Moon is? These are just two of many, many different verses that the cult used to gain authority over these people. They were never allowed the chance to mull it over in a rational way. We go over all these verses that were used against them. The propositions we presented them were always either the Bible is right and Moon is wrong, or Moon is right and the Bible is wrong. Moon never stood a chance. We would ask them, do they believe they were in fact cults? They would agree, certainly there's cults. We would ask them, did Moon ever tell you how to avoid them? You're his children. Why wouldn't he want to protect you against them? We would play tape recordings of members from other cults. They all sounded the same. After they listened to the tape, they would believe it was a Moonie, just like they were. But we would say, no, it's a Krishna girl or a Children of God member. They've been sleep deprived since they'd been in the cult. I learned in the military that rest is a weapon. After getting a number of good nights' sleep, they would be rested enough to start collating all the information that we've been giving them, and generally in about 3 days, maybe 4, they'd snap. Their eyes would fly open, their heads would jerk back, and they'd just start to weep. The oddest thing was how their faces changed. It was like CG. It was like an acid trip. Their faces would morph. They would appear to be almost plastic. It was very hard to describe if you've never seen it. The harder they snapped, the cleaner the break would be. It was just like a hypnotist saying, when I snap my fingers, you'll wake up. One question always followed. If Moon, whoever the leader was, the prophet, the disciple, whoever it was, if he's not the Messiah, who is he? Of course, the answer is he's a scoundrel, a charlatan, a con man, an awful human being. That was the most painful thing for them to accept. After all, they'd given up everything and put their whole life into following the will of this person. So, of course, it was devastating. Basically, they were in mourning, ashamed that they had been duped and had to be rescued by their folks. Within hours of them snapping, they would be sent to a cult rehab center for a couple weeks. They'd be surrounded by ex-cult members just like themselves. They needed to be away from their parents so there wouldn't be that dynamic at play. There was no pressure to do anything but recover. Their recovery time was the same as prisoners of war. For every year they spent in the cult, it took 3 years to get back to something akin to normal. In lots of cases, the damage the group had done was never fully repaired. Over the next couple of years, I would go to Seattle to jump on the boat in April and sail till October. The rest of the year, I would help Randy and the others in the deprogramming world. My forte became planning and executing the kidnappings.
Dear listener, if you have enjoyed this episode, please share it. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you listen would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me and my Mastiff, Drax the Destroyer, on the It's in the Blood Facebook page. Or you can send me an email at jesse.it'sintheblood@gmail.com. Thank you so much for your support.